Society, violence, humanity, carnage, inhumanity, rage. The zombie genre has always been about these components, except for that one final piece. Transitioning from the mindless dead voodoo slaves of White Zombie in 1932 to the cannibalistic viral undead of Night of the Living Dead in 1968, zombies as the flesh-eating walking corpses have been a standard in the horror genre ever since. Slow-moving, rotting cadavers with barely any remnant of intellect, intentionally made in this manner to mirror society and consumerism, and how common man drowfully meanders and consumes in daily life. Stepping into the 80s, zombies were stereotyped into less serious and more comical tones and parodies, becoming a part of one of the most recognizable music videos of all time with Michael Jackson's Thriller. We got the reanimated chanting brains thanks to the 1985 classic Return of the Living Dead that somewhat revitalized the zombie title in popular culture, although ironically Romero's Day of the Dead was outshined in the same year by Return, and this really highlighted the shift in the undead's dynamic. People were drawn to more goofy but equally dark and gory brain-raving dead. That would even persist throughout the 90s as zombie media as a whole would experience a gigantic dry spell relegated to cartoons, episode ideas for shows, Halloween shorts, and more, excluding the massively popular Resident Evil series. It wasn't until 2002, 28 Days Later was released, that everything changed. 28 Days Later was the first major hit that brought about the concept of not zombies but infected. It turned the preconception of zombies from rotting corpses, hyperfixated on gray matter, or barely moving and slow to learn undead into purely ravenous, unfaltering, rage-filled, bloodied people that made the biggest but simplest change to the formula. These biters could run. If you ask anyone what set 28 Days Later apart or how it changed zombies as a whole, a majority of people would simply answer, the zombies can run. These aren't the durable undead. They did not crave the flesh of the living. They in fact were living with all the same weaknesses of a normal human body. And just like their virus's namesake, were just irrationally and uncontrollably full of rage. Now, many debate whether 28 Days Later is a zombie movie or not, since the infected in the series are genuinely not the literal definition of a zombie. Hell, even George A. Romero himself has gone on record saying that, I liked the 28 Days Later films, but they're not zombies, they're not dead, they're not using it in the same way.
Zombies cannot run. I say this definitively, as the grandfather or the godfather of zombies. Zombies cannot run. So anyone who has a zombie running, don't listen to that person.
And director Danny Boyle has even stated he doesn't consider 28 Days Later a zombie movie. But I beg to differ entirely. When Romero took over the idea of reanimated corpses, he himself didn't call them zombies in the production or movie very much in the first place, instead referring to them as ghouls. And the whole idea of they're not dead, not used in the same way, is far from the truth. While zombies had the parallel of society being mindless consumers and that the living are the true monsters, these explored ideas were not a foreign concept just because the integral threat wasn't dead. 28 Days Later did something for the zombie genre that had not grabbed public attention in well over a decade. Both Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland noted Romero's works as heavy inspiration for the movie, especially wanting to focus on the exploration of the collapse of society and how it can turn people into monsters themselves. While there is a lot on this movie I want to discuss, from its themes, tone, atmosphere, and overall message, I'm going to have to save that all for a comprehensive video going over the entire film in the future. As for now, we can go over some key portions of the film that really stuck out, resonated, and decidedly influenced other minds going forward. Much like Night of the Living Dead, 28 Days Later made the decision to cast a majority of, at the time, unknown actors. Danny Boyle said this decision was made with the aim of preserving the suspension of disbelief, especially with main character Jim, played by Cillian Murphy, waking up in a hospital alone long after the outbreak had occurred, giving this dreadful sense of isolation as Jim wandered this barren world devoid of any life. Jim's perspective is that of the audience, and when he finally encounters the infected, it isn't a slow, groaning, generic zombie that we had come to know from decades of experience. No, the first first encounter is given a full sense of unease that sends an unearthly shiver down your spine.
Hello?
People jolting up from piles of dead bodies to just gawk at Jim, mouths agape in complete silence, with only the minimalist music glooming in. The bloodied, stiff priest being a man of God, now just a feral beast. All of this in the darkened and sullied church while Jim is totally defenseless, seeking refuge, being chased out as dozens of these ravenous monsters run after him. Many scenes from this film hit differently for the audience over zombie-type films of the past because of the sheer tone shifting into a much more dismal outlook. This wasn't a film focusing on campy characters surviving in a condensed area with many moments of lighthearted fun with dark moments sprinkled in. It was an entirely dark and brooding experience with a few lighthearted moments put in, all in a film with grand scale that actually felt like all of the UK was affected and wiped out. From a turned kid attacking Jim and having to put him down to the dread of the car stalling out as infected roar down the tunnel, to the way the soldiers treat other humans when law and order is all but crumbled, killing men, raping women, and treating infected former friends as mere animals. While done before, the idea that mankind and their true intentions when not held back is exemplified in this film, explaining the origins of the rage virus itself in an experimental lab where monkeys were forced to watch violent media was not only a commentary on human nature, but also showed how direct and in-your-face they were about this biological threat. The way the infected even look miserable in their state of existence, convulsing, vomiting, and their nervous system going out of whack gave us the first rabies-like zombie infection as well. The infection in turning not being limited to bites or dying, but being any bodily fluid gives a much more terrifying reality. The way two important characters get infected so easily and are promptly executed without hesitation personified both how heavy and fast this film set out to be. This wasn't something that gave you or the characters time to process emotions. It was kill or be killed. The world in and out of this film was different than it was the last time zombies dominated horror media. Things needed to be faster paced. The 2000s were embracing everything having gloomier and grittier stories. 28 Days Later came in with the sucker punch. This was not a film that aimed to be a summer blockbuster nor a typical campy gore flick. It was one of existential horror. It felt real, it felt grand in scale, and it gave new light to what a zombie movie could be, even if most don't consider it zombie media. The concept of a darker film stuck with many people, and the opening scene is still one that remains as an all-time horror classic. It was quiet to start and quiet at times, but it spoke loudly, whether in its action or set pieces. There was no cure in the hospital, no salvation in the church, no warmth in his own home, no heroes in the military, and it hit the ground running each time when this realization happened. The way the movie would go from a temporary respite of normalcy in life to suddenly having these bloodthirsty infected coming out of nowhere, attacking you in an animalistic state where any scratch, bite, or drop of blood could mean the end for you, all while the camera work feels like a found footage recording to really drive home how real and haunting this all is. All culminating in the music with the theme track In the House in a Heartbeat. Nothing quite compares to the music that this one song was able to make. Every kind of emotion, anger, fear, depression, sadness, everything melding together really exemplified what was in this movie. Everything being quiet and somber, then ramping up to a feverish pitch of no hope. Jim being alone to face it all in nothing but a hospital gown to face the idea of zombies running was scary enough to some, but the fact that not only were they fast, but the means of infection was even faster was what truly set it apart from everything before it. Alex Garland stated in the very pitch for the film to producer Andrew McDonald that he had an idea for a film. It's about running zombies, and it's got daylight, and it's in London. Note that the very idea of the film was summarized with zombies that run.
Story by Alex Garland. And Alex, the writer, was a mad zombie fan. He knew everything about the zombie genre, and I didn't. So I kind of kept a distance from it. So I said they've got to run. You know, to be really scary, they can't just stumble around going, They've got to, because otherwise you just walk away from them.
That's how game-changing that small of a concept was. The thought of zombies breaking that barrier alone set green lights ahead and would influence many zombie media platforms going forward. Although Garland himself believes that the Resident Evil series was a bigger influence on the genre as a whole than 28 Days Later ever was, with him saying, "Sometimes 28 Days Later is credited with reviving the zombie genre in some respect, but actually I think it was Resident Evil that did it because I remember playing Resident Evil, having not really encountered zombies for quite a while, and thinking, oh my god, I love zombies. I'd forgotten how much I love zombies. These are awesome." Whether Resident Evil or 28 Days Later was more influential is entirely up to you, but the idea of a much darker undertone with running feral zombies was something that would gain traction and stick from here on out for the rest of the decade and further beyond. Most, if not all, zombie media following it would harness the dark and brooding nature that this landmark title laid out. This would lead into a snowball effect for bringing zombies back into the mainstream. This could instantly be seen in Zack Snyder's remake of Dawn of the Dead in 2004, a retelling of Romero's cult classic where the biggest zombie movie was now reimagined in darker accents, and the zombies now run. Despite previous objections that zombies couldn't run and that 28 Days Later infected were not zombies, things were changing, and Snyder's Dawn of the Dead certainly drew in larger audiences with The Running Dead. The same year, Shaun of the Dead released with more traditional zombies having that stark contrast in speed, but still having strong writing, characters, and moments, which, side note, holy fuck was the UK, England, Britain on a roll with zombie movies. 2/3 of my top 3 fave zombie movies being made within 2 years of each other by the Brits. Good show! The year following this, Romero broke back into the scene with Land of the Dead in a much more darker tone than the previous films, and subsequently films like Planet Terror, Dead Snow, and Zombieland would release throughout the decade with varying degrees of tone. Books centered around zombies that eventually became movies of their own took up the mantle, like Warm Bodies, Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, and World War Z. I don't know about that last one though. Video games were also dabbling into zombie-related outings. While Resident Evil had been around since the 90s, hugely popular franchises like Call of Duty and Red Dead Redemption created their own successful zombie modes. Some of the most critically acclaimed games of all time had centered around the idea of zombies. Left 4 Dead wouldn't even be anything like it was if it wasn't for 28 Days Later. Turtle Rock Studios' own Phil Robb and Chris Ashton said the original Counter-Strike mod they created called Terror had slow-moving zombies against survivors that were trying to plant bait. It wasn't until after a viewing of 28 Days Later that they reconsidered this idea and adapted their infected to be fast-moving and ravenous enemies like the infected of the movie. And I could go off about how many games tried emulating Left 4 Dead after it came out, but you can see the chain reaction of 28 Days Later to Left 4 Dead here. In 2009, Naughty Dog had also begun production on the biggest zombie narrative game of all time, The Last of Us. There was a cultural boom in everything zombie related from what seems like the starting point of 2002's 28 Days Later, and even with its sequel 2007's 28 Weeks Later. This would snowball exponentially into the Indiana Jones boulder-sized cultural phenomenon of The Walking Dead in 2010. Zombies were already wildly popular and a must for people to go to cinemas, but over the course of the 2010s, The Walking Dead suddenly brought in the rest of society to enjoy this medium. The zeitgeist went from The Running Dead to The Walking Dead that brought zombies back into their original rotting slow form. Although, funnily enough, both franchises started pretty much in the exact same way. Jim and Rick both awaken from a hospital-induced coma to a world ravaged by the zombie apocalypse, alone and frail. Walking Dead creator Robert Kirkman has stated it was a little annoying, but great minds think alike, right? Kirkman discussed the timing of the two pieces of zombie fiction, saying, "I saw 28 Days Later shortly before the first issue of Walking Dead was released. That first issue issue came out in October of 2003, and 28 Days Later was released in the States in June of 2003. So we were already working on our second issue by the time I saw it. It's funny how these coincidences can happen, but while The Walking Dead would undoubtedly be the much larger influence on zombies becoming popular with the normies, I mean the wider public, it's hilarious to think two extremely integral parts of bringing zombies into the mainstream were created in basically the exact same time frame, with one waiting until the next decade to unleash its full potential. The 2010s would see everyone hopping on the zombie gravy train thanks to Call of Duty, Walking Dead, Left 4 Dead, Zombieland, The Last of Us, and a lot more, to the point that the concept was oversaturated and people were finally burnt out on the idea of zombies.
Everybody loved zombies 8 fucking years ago.
Although the zombie genre would see a resurgence with the running dead with movies like World War Z, and then South Korea having its own 2000s British zombie renaissance with Train to Busan and All of Us Are Dead, both incorporating fast zombies that both borrowed 28 Days Later in terms of speed, in movement and infection, and World War Z in terms of how they move in groups. With The Walking Dead over and split into multiple spin-offs and other major zombie releases being mostly swept into obscurity or under the radar, it's safe to say zombies aren't the titan they once were. Coming from the channel that focuses primarily on zombies, that is a bitter pill to bite and swallow. But then again, before 28 Days Later, the same thing could have been said for culture at that time. Zombies were a joke going into the new millennium. Everything about them was one-note campiness. And there's nothing exactly wrong with that, but you can't deny how 28 Days Later spurred everything that came after it. How Danny Boyle and Alex Garland's black vision of post-Rage London shaped how zombie films should be or would be. How threatening the small fact of running could change the game of the zombie forever, and so much. With lead actor Cillian Murphy even saying this: "The film did so well, and you watch zombie stuff. We were the first people to make zombies run and changed everything. It has a very special place in my heart. It was a paradigm shift in attaining the audience's attention with its narrative and cinematography that made for a more than memorable experience overall." 28 Days Later would become the progenitor and inspiration for so many zombie shows, books, video games, zombie media in general for ages to come. This all compounded to really bring the zombie genre back from the dead. Who knows, with it now being 15 years since 28 Weeks Later and 20 years since 28 Days Later, who's to say turning the series into a trilogy won't reboot the zombie genre again, especially with hints at the sequel that have been floating around for over half a decade. With 28 Months Later still on the back burner, the script and screenplay have been batted around and ironed out since 2015 when it was mentioned by Alex Garland for the first time. In 2018, Danny Boyle had also told Entertainment Weekly,
Alex had an idea for the third one. It's a lovely idea.
Okay.
But Alex is directing himself at the moment, and he's finishing a huge TV series. So I'm not sure we'll make much progress on it in the immediate future. But
Could you co-direct?
I don't know I don't quite know what we do. It's an interesting idea again.
For the film's 20th anniversary, Danny Boyle and Cillian Murphy both stated in an interview with NME that Garland's script for 28 Months Later was written years ago, and Boyle called it a lovely idea, adding, "I'd be very tempted to direct it. It feels like a very good time actually. 28 Months Later might come back into focus because of one of the things that's happening in the business of movies at the moment. It has to be a big reason for you to even want to go to the cinema, because there are less and less reasons." Garland continued that it's hard for companies distributing films and for cinema chains to show films. They're struggling to get people into the cinema unless it's something like Top Gun Maverick or a Marvel film, but a third part would get people in if it was half decent. So with cinema being fueled with franchise familiarity and nostalgia, now and the near future may be a better time than ever to bring back the number that rejuvenated a genre that was first made into a joke and then beaten like a dead horse because of one TV show and many, many cash grabs. 28 months later will more than likely bring back the dark, gritty, solitary tone that left its fanbase divided in the sequel, as Garland, Boyle, and Murphy expressed interest in returning for the third film. But only time will tell. Until then, we can express gratitude for what the movie had done to keep zombies and zombie-like accessories interesting and new, to inspire more creative dead denizens down the line. That's all I've got for you today. What did you think about my look into how 28 Days Later changed the zombie genre? Was it too long? Are you gonna leave a comment that says the zombies could run, saved you a click? Well, do it anyways. Comments are good for the YouTube algorithm, but hey, this was a video I was excited to put together, as any chance to discuss 28 Days and Weeks Later is always on my radar. And hell, maybe I'll go over the themes and narratives of both films in the future. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in that. Support the channel by becoming a YouTube channel member or donating to my Patreon to be featured on this list of sexy people here. And until next time, I'm Zackass, aka Wow Such Gaming. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, and keep watching zombie stuff, because that's how this channel stays alive. Keep zombies alive. I'm desperate, man, and stay well.